Welcome back to The Chosen Life. I'm your host, The Chosen Lawyer, and back for yet another episode. This is now monumental episode 76. Not NBA star, but star of the automotive world, real estate world, and life coaching world, because this is just a man of knowledge and experience and brings greatness to the world, Mr. George Hill. George, welcome back to The Chosen Life.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be part of it again.
People are asking for you because you're sharing so many tidbits and wisdoms and everything. But I warned you, before we get to any kind of intro, there's been a lot going on in the world. I send you an agenda and we think we're going to go in one direction, which we will. But George, there's been some interesting stuff that's been popping up in the world just as we started to tape. So I got to hit you with a couple items. Do you want to go two categories, useful or useless?
I mean, listen, I'm always about the useful, but I could venture on both.
All right, I'm going to start with useless then.
Okay.
Okay. This is actually going to be fun if you want to share it at a party, But one of the most famous lines in movie history, our good friend Arnold Schwarzenegger, Terminator.
Mm-hmm.
The famous line being, I'll be back.
Or it could be hasta la vista, baby.
Or hasta la vista, baby.
Yeah, one of the two.
We'll go with I'll be back. George, now, I always assumed that Arnold came up with that because it was so witty, so fitting for all of his type of characters, right? With those like 3-4 words. Did you know that Arnold fought James Cameron to not use that line?
Wow, I did not know that.
If you click onto Netflix and watch the Arnold documentaries just come out, apparently Arnold thought it was quite silly and not fitting for the Terminator role. James got quite mad at him and said to him, "Who's the effing writer, me or you?" And Arnold said, "You." So he said, "Say the line." Arnold now admits, probably the most iconic line of all time. I'm really glad I listened to James. He was right.
That's true.
Can you imagine that movie without that line?
No, I cannot. And plus, it set it up for the sequel too, right? Like, let's be honest.
He said it in every movie since. Absolutely.
Right.
So it goes to show you sometimes you think you have an instinct of something and you think you're right. It's good to listen to the people that knows best, trust your advisors and everything. And we'll get into that kind of topic in the going in. But future dinner parties, soirees, yacht meetings, you'll be able to share this information with others.
Absolutely.
Now let's get to the useful part.
Okay, useful.
Now, you back in the day, you did grow up somewhat of a wrestling fan, correct?
Yes.
Favorite wrestlers growing up?
Tatanka, Hulk Hogan, obviously, because everybody loved Hulk Hogan back in the day, and Razor Ramon. Razor Ramon was my number one favorite.
Can you imagine?
May he rest in peace.
Correct. May he rest in peace. We all love Razor Ramon. Tatanka, Native American Tatanka was his name. Mm-hmm. This is a character you'll never see again ever in wrestling. This would not have occurred, but back in the day, in politically incorrect times, that was considered a character. And even still on the circuit, he's quite popular.
Yep.
And I'm wearing my wrestling shirt now because we had to talk about a wrestling topic today. So, politically incorrect character. We lost today, unfortunately. The one and only, the Iron Sheik.
Oh.
The Iron Sheik has passed away as of 81 years old.
Wow. Well, he lived long from wrestling standards, really, because a lot of the guys exited before that.
Absolutely. So many guys go in their 50s for sure.
Yeah.
And, he was at very much difficulties walking. A little bit of information, George, which I'm sure you want to know about the Iron Sheik. WWE Hall of Famer in 2005. He was the heavyweight champion back in 1983. He beat Bob Backlund for it in Madison Square Garden. Only shortly afterwards, back in Madison Square Garden, to lose it to Hulk Hogan. Hogan. So he was what you call a transitionary champion. Backlund was a champion forever.
Yep.
Vince McMahon Jr. decides Hulk Hogan is my guy. I'm going to build the company all around Hulk Hogan. Vince was very right about that. But having him beat Bob Backlund is not very exciting. But you have a USA-hating Iranian by the name of the Iron Sheik who comes out and says, Iran number one, USA, puh. That is a great gimmick back in 1983-84. And this is who we're going to give the championship to. And then Hulk Hogan is going to be the All-American, beat him, and Hulk were running wild across the United States and the globe.
Correct.
And so Iron Sheik was a champion for a short time, always remembered as a champion, but he really helped set up that rivalry. Plus, with Nikolai Volkov and the tag team, Iron Sheik was one of the great ones, long remembered. So sad to see him go. Don't know how many of those we're going to see in the future.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, may he rest in peace. 81 years old. That's really good for the wrestling world in terms of longevity because we really have lost many of them too young.
Hossein Khosrow Ali Vaziri. That was his real name.
Wow.
And so Hulk Hogan, Bob Backlund, and Sergeant Slaughter. As you can imagine, he fought against all the American greats.
Yeah.
And I've read before that he had a very hard time going in and out of arenas because people took this seriously. Like they really believed he hated America. He was so convincing. He was great on the mic. Generational talent, and wrestling for so many years. I can't recall how far back. I believe he was internationally in 1971. I believe I had read before. So he was an amateur wrestler, and then coming up the ranks, became a professional wrestler. Was in the AWA back in the day, where even Hulk Hogan got his start too. Eventually, Vince McMahon took all those guys, Mean Gene Okerlund, brought everybody over to WWF at the time, which became WWE. I can't think of wrestling in the 80s without thinking of the Iron Sheik.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And his funky shoes.
Yeah, you remember with
the curls and the curls on the top of it, right?
That's right. And he had the camel clutch as the finishing move, where basically he sat on your back.
Yeah. It was like
hold your arms.
Yeah.
And stretched you over.
Yeah.
Scott Steiner did the same move, and he called it the Steiner recliner.
Steiner recliner. That's right.
There'd be no Steiner recliner without the Iron Sheik. So
that's true.
We've lost a wrestling great, and we almost lost the best movie line of all time, if not for James Cameron.
Wow. Learned something new today.
We always do.
I will carry it forward in good faith.
Well, carrying forward in good faith as we start today's episode, George, you and I had a chance to sit down recently and discuss the world of automotive and where things are at. And, as you say things, you don't realize always you're planting seeds in my head, but it kind of sticks to me. And I think to myself, I want to hear more about this. So you kind of say something, I'm like, okay, I'm going to leave this. I'm going to bring it back because I want to carry the conversation organically. I want the listeners to think right now, you're pulling up a chair, you're sitting with George and I, and we're going to be talking cars. And I want to pick George's brain because the man has been around automotive for a long time. He's forgotten more than I'll ever know. One of the first questions was what I asked you was, being you were part of so GM of Erinwood Ford and Direct Nissan over in Mississauga, Ontario.
Yep.
Been with Ford for quite some time. George, not to say anything negative about Ford, but man, compared to the Ford when I grew up, so I was born in the late 70s. I grew up with the 1980s Fords. Looking today in the year 2023, man, they have come a long, long way.
I mean,
I think about the big three at the time when I was growing up was GM, Ford, and Chrysler.
Mm-hmm.
Chrysler having its struggles and being all over the map of who owns them and what's going on. Quality seems to always be an issue. GM kind of being in the middle of the rank. Ford could have gone the Chrysler route, and somehow they pulled up slowly to the point now that we're talking to them on par with anything coming out of Korea, Japan. How have they done this? How have they come this far in the past 20 plus years? What's going on, George?
Well, I mean, from even when I started in the business, 2006, the product then was far better than the stuff in the 90s and the 80s. Although those engines in the 80s and stuff were pretty unbreakable, where they really had a lot of problems with transmissions and things like that, right? But from the time I started here to where it is today, it is completely night and day. And a big part of it has to do with they had a push back in 2009, 2010, that kind of area where they made a huge push for quality assurance to make sure that things were double checked and triple checked. At one point, what they ended up doing, Ford as a company, they took the designers. So I don't know if you noticed that there was a big shift in the design of the vehicles around the 2012-13 mark. So Ford went to Europe and they brought all the European designers here, and they took all the North American designers and planted them in Europe. because they wanted to get that European feel to the cars that they actually have today. So the rounded corners and the sleek lights and things like that they have in them. I mean, the trucks now are looking a little bit boxier, but when you're looking at anything else, an Escape has great lines. When they had the Fusion on the road, great lines. So that was part and parcel of that shift, because you were getting a more attractive product. Then they teamed it up with they had a partnership with Microsoft. So the first version of Sync was designers and engineers from Microsoft and Ford that worked on that together and created that product. And that was the beginning of some of the, even though it was a little bit glitchy, some of the best in class Bluetooth connectivity. And I remember I was driving a Fusion Sport years ago, and this actually had a 2 terabyte recording device in there, so I could take my CDs and rip them and save them onto a hard drive. Right? It was actually pretty neat, the stuff that they're putting in cars. They were the first people to come up with the wave your foot under the tailgate opening. That was a Ford design. Ford came up with something called torque vectoring, where it utilizes various what's the best way to say it? Controls in place that analyze the power that's being shifted to the wheels, and it will balance that power on corners. So that was one of the things that they came up with. They came up with so many patents over the last few years that they ended up sharing with some manufacturers, and some of them they have 150-year patents on that they're going to get paid for. And that's how they kept doing it. They kept bringing their engineers from all over the world and creating better and better products. And this is what you're seeing today. And as everyone knows, Ford is giving a big push to the electric vehicle space, and they're coming out with more and more products. As I told you the last time we spoke, that I'll be moving to an electric truck next week, and it's going to be interesting for me. So the next time we do speak about it, I'll be able to give you my honest opinion on how it is. I've driven them before. Amazing vehicles to drive. It's like you're driving on air. I'm sure it might be a little bit of adjustment because everybody fears about the range anxiety and stuff like that. I'll have to see how it goes, because ultimately the best way to do it is to experience it firsthand to give a good review of it, right? But yeah, they're all the things Ford did throughout the years, and they also changed direction in terms of the people that led the company, right? They brought in guys like Alan Mulally, who was the CEO of Ford, that made some radical changes to get them on the right track at a time where they didn't take the bailout from the government, because they made plans ahead of time to make sure that they're in a secure position. It allowed them to have a lot of flexibility in how they're going to do their things, because they didn't have to take a bailout from the government. They didn't have to follow certain rules. So it allowed them a lot of flexibility to be creative in their space. And that's all part and parcel of how they are where they are today.
Something I've never asked you before, but it just kind of hit me that how Ford had the Mercury brand and they would just make the almost exact same car, just different badging. GM would do that with 5 different models. You'd have the Chevrolet, the Pontiac, the Oldsmobile, and they would all be the exact same car, just a different badge. And then you have the higher level, the Lincoln versions of a lot of those automobiles. Where are things at as far as Ford, Mercury, and Lincoln goes? Is Mercury still being produced in the world?
No. So Mercury, when I first started in the business, Mercury was being phased out. So as a Ford dealer, you could not sell Mercury. But if you were a Ford dealer that carried Mercury before, you still had a transitional period. It was not very, very long, but that's why back in that time, a lot of Ford dealerships ended up kind of shutting down, because you had too many dealers for the amount of people in there. So the Mercury dealers became Ford and Mercury. And for example, Dave that owns Erinwood now, he was a Mercury dealer. He had to become a Ford, but there was a transitional period out. And that's how he ended up coming into Erinwood. He had the opportunity to purchase Erinwood because there were too many dealers close to each other, and he had to find somewhere else to go. And this is where he ended up. So that's how they did that. So there's no more Mercury. The last thing that they actually produced, as far as I recall, from Mercury was the Mariner, which was the Escape.
Marauder?
No. The Mariner.
Mariner. So there was a Mariner.
Yeah, Mariner.
Okay.
And that, or Mariner, I don't know how you exactly pronounce it, but it was the Escape version the Ford Escape version in a Mercury, and it had a slightly different badging, and it looked slightly different because of the way they put the badging on there, and the lights were kind of cleared out. Now you did have the Marauder, which we all know is a the guys always used to say it's an old man supercar practically because it's a muscle car. It's an old man muscle car because those things used to fly, right? I actually see one that drives around Port Credit every once in a while, and it's in pristine shape. So they're pretty rare. And the Ford counterpart to that was the Crown Victoria, right? When you had the Mercury version of it, you also had the Crown Victoria. So yeah, Mercury's gone, but they still. The last time I was looking at some of the automotive news stuff, they still hold the names. So, for example, if they wanted to take the name the same way that they took the Maverick and they made it into a truck now, they still hold the name so they can take it and use it for the future if they want to introduce new products.
Interesting.
Right?
Yes.
Let's talk about Lincoln versus Ford. So, up to about 5 years ago, the Lincoln and Ford product, if you look at an Edge, for example, you had an Edge, and the Edge version was the MKX. Okay, so the MKX, you pull them up next to each other. The Lincoln had a little bit more chrome, a little bit more wood interior, a couple more power features, right? And same engine, same transmission. When you look at Lincoln today, if you're looking at a Navigator versus an Expedition, they're close, but there's a certain level of refinement that you get in the Lincoln that is not exactly there in an Expedition. Now, the Expedition is top notch because I've driven them consistently for the past 4 or 5 years. But we're not a Lincoln dealer. But when I do get into a Navigator, for example, a lot more power options on the seat, so you can adjust your lumbar so many different ways. The neck, underneath your legs, there's additional features in the way that the transmission is. So that instead of using a dial, that you have push buttons that you use. The seats are a little bit more comfortable. So there's that level of refinement, but you're paying obviously a pretty big upcharge now for it. Before it used to be a $10,000 spread. No, it's probably a $30,000 spread now on something like that. I mean, they're both great products. The Lincoln just gives you that luxury feel that although the Expedition does have it, it's to another level, right?
If you were put in charge of the Lincoln division and they said, George Hill, we like what you're doing. We need to get you on the advisory board. If you were going to look at the direction of Lincoln into the future in the next 5 years, 10 years, where would you take it? Because I can tell you, for me, I still have this perception. I look at Cadillac, I look at Lincoln, and I have this perception, old man. That's just the stigma that's there. Except when you go actually see the products, and you go driving them, like go see a Blackwing Cadillac or go see a Navigator. Yeah, you're gonna think differently. But as far as where they could go, I always thought in a perfect world, they're gonna be up there with the Audis, the Mercedes, the BMW. That's where they should be at. Can they do that? Can they even exceed it? What do you think? What do you think Lincoln would need to do to be able to get to that echelon?
I mean, it's a tough question because I mean, Lincoln does make a great product, and it is luxury. There's no doubt about it. It's a luxury product. But for people to perceive it the same as your really high end Mercedes and stuff like that, even though the price point is pretty much there, I mean, it's just a change in perception. And maybe what they need to do is come up with a ultra cool product that nobody else has something like to get the name there out more. Lincoln's a small part of the market, and to get to a volume amount of it to compete with high-end Mercedes and stuff, that it will be hard because that market is very well locked down. I think for Lincoln, a lot of people that want to drive Lincolns because they've historically driven Lincolns, right? And they continue to drive them because they really enjoy them. So to get people into it a little bit more, you kind of got to do a little bit like what Cadillac did. They had got a little bit more racy advertising. So, I don't remember seeing the Cadillac advertising where they're like, oh, it's not an old man car anymore. And because the car's flying up the street sideways, you got to bring that kind of freshness to it to open up the market. The problem is if you're trying to introduce it to young people, let's call them, let's say let's call them below 40, right? That doesn't include you or me. It's hard because the price point is almost out of reach, right? And Mercedes, they just continue to have that because let's face it, they do have smaller and lower end models that are, let's call it affordable, but people feel well, I'm driving a Mercedes, so I'm special, right? It's this perception's reality. It's a hard thing. It's a hard thing, and it'll take a long time to change that perception unless you can come up with some nice, let's call it sassy, flashy things that'll actually pinpoint the really good things about the product, because it definitely is on par. There is no doubt that it's on par. The pricing's there, but people are like, oh, well, I'd rather drive a Mercedes than a Lincoln. I'd rather drive a Lincoln over the Mercedes because the technology is there, the comfort's there. You get into a Mercedes versus a Lincoln, the technology is way better in a Lincoln, but that's not the perception. So it's hard. It's going to take a lot of marketing to get what the product does, to get people to understand what the product does. And you know, because they're not high volume, it may be a losing proposition to spend that kind of money on a marketing campaign unless you can back it up in sales. You may have to remain status quo to keep Lincoln brand going really strong and continue to get people to understand that it's a quality brand, right?
You know which brand I think would actually really benefit Lincoln? And it's
What's that?
Genesis. Genesis. Why I
Yeah.
think that is because you think that in my mind, when they brought out Genesis, for example, the same way I remember when Lexus came out and Toyota did that and Acura came out, you know, Lexus and Acura were not around forever. Neither was
Mhm.
Infinity, Infinity being for the Nissan model. And this is their upper echelon. And how do you make these cars without it seeming like a higher end Toyota or a higher end Honda?
Yeah.
When the Genesis was originally a model of Hyundai, and then they brought it out as its own brand.
Yeah.
And now when I've sat in people's cars, I went in their SUVs and I said, wow, I'm pretty impressed with the luxury here. I feel like, and you see the look of it, I'm like, oh, it kind of looks like a Bentley. What's going on here?
Mhm.
I think this would benefit Lincoln and Cadillac, for example, because it's bringing people to the mindset of luxury. And they're saying, I don't have to drive a European car per se.
Yeah.
And so they're feeling comfortable driving in that model car. I think that having a fresh type look, like you're saying, campaign for younger audience, being let's say late 20s, 30s. I think the main competition is Genesis actually, and I think there's actually bringing
Yeah.
more people to the marketplace who hadn't thought of driving those type of cars. So
That's true.
I think that could be a good thing.
So, I mean, to a certain respect, every Lincoln dealer has a separate Lincoln showroom, right? We know Nav pretty well, and Nav has his Hyundai Mississauga right across from us, and he's also building a Genesis showroom, and that's part and parcel of their mandate that you have to have a separate showroom. The thing is that it's wonderful to have it as a marketing tool, but it's extremely cost prohibitive because you got to put up another showroom. So as a dealer, it's you got to be all in, and sometimes it's hard. The return on investment is very hard to recoup because let's face it, construction costs is way up there these days, and Genesis is going to want you to use certain high quality brands of fixtures in the store for it to have that certain feel. Because previously, what they were doing, they had it in square one, similar to how you know, you have Tesla and stuff like that, right? Now it's going to be a standalone showroom, and it is as large as his Hyundai showroom,
Wow.
right? But the problem is that you need to have a little bit more volume to make sure your return on investment is there as a dealer who's going to have to pay, for argument's sake, $8 million to put up a building. This is where it gets really tough for dealers unless they have the inventory to continue to push it through. And as we all know, there's still inventory shortages in the world today. In North America, there's still part shortages. You don't hear much about chip shortages anymore because they seem to have gotten that under control. But it's also a capacity thing, and trying to catch up on orders and things like that have slowed down the amount of inventory that's being able to be processed through dealers, right? So it's a hard one. I agree with you. It does take the marketing. Lincoln has the separate store the same way Genesis has the separate store. Genesis is a wonderful car. I have not driven one, but I have been in one, and they did a spot on job with the vehicle. I know they spent unlimited amounts of money, the Korean government, on Hyundai, Kia, and Genesis to make sure that they were bringing the quality up to the par of, you know, North American and some of the Japanese brands, because they were lacking at one time. They've done a wonderful job. It's not an overnight thing. This is 15 years in the making, right? So it does take that long to get you there. And what Genesis has come up with a product that is a little bit unique, because I was watching a video of Nav's daughter doing a walk around of the Genesis that she's driving, and the features are great. it is something that looks really, really nice, and the seats are comfortable. Like initially when I saw her sitting in it before she got out, it looked like, one of those F-type Lexuses with the red seats that are like Recaro seats that hold you. And I was like, hey, hang on a second. And then as she backed off and did her walk around, which was very thorough, um, it was you could tell that it was a really, really nice vehicle. So, Lincoln has the same thing in place. They have the buildings, they have that. They probably got to step up their marketing a little bit, but both Lincoln and Genesis got to make sure that they're getting the inventory to support the profitability for dealers to be all in on it.
Yeah, and that's the bottom. This is a business, and people kind of forget that. I think at times, I
Correct.
remember reading an
Correct.
article many, many years ago, where it's one thing about sales. GM was saying, "Oh, look at how many Sunfires and Cavaliers we're selling." You're having a top seller, and you're competing with the Honda Civic, but you've priced it in a way that you're losing money on each car you're selling.
Correct.
So they were better off selling no cars because every time another car sold, they kept losing more and more
Yeah.
money.
Yeah.
That's not a winning proposition there.
No, and it's not like a supermarket, right? So, a supermarket will put on, loss leader on their Pepsi or their Coke or something, right? Because they feel that other people, they'll come in and they'll buy more things. They're not there just to buy the Coke and Pepsi. They're there to buy the chips and buy the things that have the markup because historically that's what happens,
eight
right?
dollar dip.
Right. The dealers don't always have that advantage because person's not coming in to buy two cars at one shot all the time, number one. Number two, you can only sell them so many products to protect their investment and warranty and rust packages and things like that to help augment that, because on those loss leaders from the manufacturer, for example, back in the day, which now it doesn't necessarily happen. It happens now in the research and development recoup stage. And that's why they say, great, we need to recoup this money. And this is why you see price increases from manufacturers because of that, because they need to recoup the R&D on something within a certain period of time. Then after that, it becomes a profitable line once the inventory flows through. But it's hard for a dealer because the markup's not there on those ones. So you think back to, let's say for argument's sake, a base Focus. A base Focus when we were selling cars, 5-speed manual at the time, your markup was $800 from MSRP to dead cost. That's not a lot. And when you look at how much it costs to run a dealership, and you've seen the size of our dealership, we're not a small dealership. It's a pretty expensive thing. So you really need to have a good balance and keep an eye on the business because it's a balancing act for sure.
Well, something that you and I talked about before, and before we get to the next topic, I want to actually hit upon that because it's funny how organically we kind of touch upon these things. But even during shortages, let's say in a typical SUV car, whatever, in this day and age, you could have the base model, you can have the fully loaded model with all the bells and whistles, and then that middle kind of packages where you have one or two of the package, not all four packages. And what I've kind of noticed when I was flipping around in new cars, and I think you and I touched upon this a couple of times in conversations, that it's people today are a lot more sophisticated than they used to be. As far as saying, I don't want the cheapest and the lowest with no, I've done my research. I want certain bells and whistles. I need these
Correct.
things in my life. And the base model could be sitting. The fully loaded, souped up with everything could be sitting. It's that middle ground, that sweet spot. Those are the hardest cars to get. Did you find that that was the case in the past few
Yeah,
months?
yeah. I would definitely say so because, like, I mean, for argument's sake, as a manufacturer, so let's use Nissan or Ford as an example. They would want to produce the items that are better for their profitability, right? Because when they sell it to the dealer and the dealer turns around and sells it, they make more off of it. So they'll produce a lot more of the higher end stuff. So I'll give you an example. Audi and Volkswagen are very similar vehicles. You look at an Audi, you look at a Volkswagen, they're pretty identical. Badging is a little bit different. Some of the performance is slightly different. But as a manufacturer, Volkswagen and Audi made a decision that they were going to produce a lot more Audis because to keep them sustainable over the shortage, they got better profitability on selling the Audis. That's what you got to do as a dealer.
And there we go. And so that's where I got to ask you because you were hitting upon it that you're going to be able to give us in our next time we have you on. You're going to give us your take, having driven it yourself, not
Yep.
just a couple of times, but actually as a daily driver, the electric F-150.
Yep.
So is there a code name for this vehicle, or is it just
It's
called
the
the electric?
Lightning.
The Lightning. Okay.
So back in the day, the Lightning
Yes.
was an SVT truck. If you ever look it up, it had side steps. It was pretty attractive looking truck, and it was fast. So for what it was back then, it was fast. Some guys actually still have. I saw a guy had one in pristine condition at a car show I went to. They were very rare. They were always a side step, flare step because it looked a little bit different. Souped up engine. They were great cars, but they used the word Lightning because of the play on electricity, obviously, and it was already a trademark name for them, so they didn't have to create something new and trademark it. And I can say though, if you were to put the old Lightning against the new Lightning, the new Lightning would absolutely kill it in a quarter-mile race.
And so now the Lightning versus the F-150, are fans going to be concerned as far as where everything's going with the electrical movement? As far as, are we good one day going to see not a gas F-150? You think, or do you think
No,
you're going to see both versions?
you're going to see both versions. Like, you know, you look at the application of it in theory. If you're using it as a daily driver and you drive to work 50 kilometers a day, you're totally fine. If you have a charger at home, you come home every few days, you charge it overnight. It brings you to a full charge. The full charge in the summer on an extended range F-150 Lightning is over 520 kilometers. So you'll get a good amount of usage out of it. In the winter, it drops down because you got to precondition your vehicle. That's one of the things that people are like, oh, hey, I'm getting half of what I was getting because it's so cold. You keep your vehicle plugged in, you precondition it so that it warms it up, and it gives you a little bit more range. Where you run into a problem is, hey, summer's coming around. I want to do a road trip with the family, and I'm going to drive from here to Florida. Now, the beautiful thing about having the electric vehicles is that you download an app. On the navigation, it tells you where all the charging stations are and all those various things. So it can help you plot out where you need to charge. It exists in every EV vehicle. The problem is that there's no mechanism on that app to tell you if the chargers are operational or not. Right? And that's one of the things, because you can pull up to a charger. Great. I got 18 kilometers left. And you pull up and, oh, out of order. Then you're like, oh, shoot, I got to find another one. So you got to scramble to find another one. The nice thing is, obviously, if you're using highways, you get off of those en route and those truck stops and stuff, they have a full bank of them. They're all typically high-speed chargers, level 3. They'll get you within about 20 minutes or so. It'll get you back 80% of your charge because it does not go beyond 80 on the high-speed chargers to protect the battery. And basically, it'll run you 6 or 7. Actually, my controller had his truck, and he drove up north, and he stopped. It cost him $7 to charge for 22 minutes, and he got back 80% of his charge, and he kept going because he was pulling his boat, because towing reduces your charging. But it didn't take him very long. He says, by the time I went to use the bathroom, grabbed a coffee, came back out, I was almost ready to roll, and it didn't inconvenience my life that much, because it's a little bit of an adjustment if you're going to be doing long travel with it. But if you can travel daily, and you can have a charger at home, maybe have a charger at work, you're never going to run into a problem. It's when you get on those extended things, you got to kind of really plan for it. But keep in mind, 500 and something kilometers, over 520 kilometers to a full charge is still pretty significant. And the fact that you can go to high-speed charger and gas up in the time that you grab a coffee and use the bathroom and, maybe walk around the place for a little bit, it's not that bad.
And it's $7.
I'll tell you if I run out next time.
Please. $7 compared to
It was $7. It
$100.
was $7
Yeah.
that he showed me on his app, because he downloaded an app that you fill it up with money and you use it at the various chargers, Flow and stuff like that.
I did not realize that on the high speed that chargers that it only goes to 80% capacity, but it makes sense
80%.
like you're saying, as far as save the battery life.
Correct. Just like your cell phone, if you ever use your fast charging cable, it tells you that it actually starts to slow it down. On my phone, it says I'm slowing it down to be fully charged by tomorrow morning at this time, because it doesn't want to fry the battery. When you have a level 2 charger, with your extended range, it takes longer, so it does not, surge the battery that much. It goes all the way up to 90% or more for the charge. It looks like 100%, but Ford builds in protection. That's something we learned in our training. They build in a little bit of protection in the battery just to make sure you get the longevity out of it. And if you've ever wanted to see what an F-150 battery looks like, I'm sure you can Google it and see it, but it's actually 9 panels. So you have the frame of the truck, and it's 9 panels that are all interconnected. So that in case something goes wrong with one of them, you replace the panel rather than the whole battery. So it's a pretty interesting infrastructure. We got to see it at a trade show in Vegas. They had the battery there all laid out on the frame, and it was a engineering wonder.
Now, if I'm going to go charge my Lightning, can I use any charger for cars? So if I see Tesla chargers, for example, are Tesla chargers compatible?
So currently, if you have a model right now, they're not. However, Ford and Tesla just put together an agreement where they're going to have adapters, and that's going to allow them to utilize each other's charging network. So here's the thing: as a manufacturer, what Ford is trying to do is make its charging network extremely large across North America. Okay. It helps them attract more people from buying the EVs. It's going to stop all the range anxiety because you have an available high-speed charger at any Ford dealership that's public facing. They're not free, but at least you have that. And now the fact that they're going to tap into the Tesla high-speed chargers as part of their network as well too, and vice versa, it's going to make life a lot easier for the switch to EV transition, right? So who knows? I mean, every manufacturer is going pretty strong with it. If you look back at some YouTube videos, back in the day, they had these little cars, and there was a guy in England that was making electric vehicles. And it was supposed to be the next big thing in the 1960s, somewhere around there. I'll have to show it to you next time we get together, so you can understand what I'm talking about. And that died a natural death. But however, when you look at the manufacturers now from marketing and from the standpoint of planning for the future, there are no plans that don't have EV involved in it, right?
So on that note, I have to ask you, the introduction of the Mach-E was when? What model year?
2021. Yeah.
The Lightning's intro year was?
2022.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now, sitting here in mid 2023, we're excited for the launches of 2024 between Ford, Nissan. Looking to the next model years, are there any tidbits or things you could share with us that as far as what we should be excited for in upcoming releases?
So they just launched a new Escape, 2024 Escape. Some nice changes on their different packages that give you some good value for money. They're coming out with a Ranger, a newly redesigned Ranger. They're going to have a Ranger Raptor. It's on our ordering guides, but there's no news as to when it's coming to Canada. So that's one thing that they have. They launched a Bronco Raptor, which is a phenomenal vehicle. It's a beast. That came out recently, and it's quite nice. They've redesigned the Super Duty as well. So that's where Ford has gone with some of their product offerings. They're supposed to be coming out with other EV iterations soon. We just don't know what they are. But you look at it, they got a pretty fresh lineup. They got a pretty fresh lineup. The Maverick is something that's still very popular. We still have some inventory issues with getting Mavericks, but they're very, very popular, and they're a nice little truck to drive around, especially for the younger people that are really good in technology. Somebody who may need a truck to do a little bit of work, but want to have the convenience of something that's small that fits in parking garages and it's good to boot around in. That was really good. F-150 is always on the top of its game, in my opinion. Obviously they've been the number one selling truck for the last 52 years. So there's obviously something good about it. So F-150 is always on this game. Expedition is being redesigned with new packages that are coming out. They have like a black stealth package. It looks really nice. And Mustang, the 2024 Mustang was redesigned. So if you look it up, you'll see there's some very nice design cues that have changed it, and they're coming out with the Dark Horse, which they've launched the horsepower ratings on it. I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's an absolute monster in terms of what you're getting in a GT Mustang. It's because there's going to be no Shelby for this year. So the dark horse is going to be the iteration that's going to give you like the raw power. So that's going to continue down the road. So that's the exciting stuff for Ford. When we look at the Nissan product now, uh, they're redesigning the kicks. So the kicks has been a very popular. It technically looks like a, let's call it a. It looks like a hatchback slash station wagon, but they're redesigning it completely. I have not seen it yet, but one of the things that was missing in the kicks, because it makes you feel a little bit like you're driving a small SUV when you're driving it, is that it was only available in front wheel drive. So they're going to an all wheel drive iteration of it. They're making it larger. They're changing the design queue completely. So that's something exciting that's coming down the pipe for Nissan. They did a little bit of a refresh on the Sentra, even though the Sentra was refreshed in 2020. They're refreshing that a little bit. So they've added some new packages and stuff that look really nice on that. They're going to have a transition where the Qashqai may be transitioning out, no longer as a product, because you know the new version of the kicks is going to compete with that. The Pathfinder has been very nice. They have that was redesigned, but they brought out the Rock Creek edition again, which it's kind of an off-road edition, similar to like a Timberline or something like that Ford offers. Looks really nice. And of course, they had the 400Z that came out, which there's very low quantity of those across Canada and the US. We were fortunate enough to sell two of them. We had the Heritage Yellow, the original yellow, even though it doesn't look exactly like the same yellow. And we had a blue one recently that we sold to some customers, and they really did a very nice job on the design of that. It's a pretty quick car. I did not take it for a drive because they were pre-sold, and I want people to make sure that they're getting into the cars pre-sold and knowing that people didn't take it for a run. We're very careful about that. And the Aria was Nissan's second edition of an electric vehicle, because you got to remember Nissan had the Leaf for many years, and it was one of the ones that was the only electric vehicle available at the time, full electric. And then Ford had the Ford Focus. So when you look at a Nissan, the things they've changed, the Leaf has been redesigned. It looks quite nice, and they've extended the battery ranges on the Plus models. So you're getting like 420 kilometers for a full charge on a small car like that. That's wonderful. And the Aria is let's call it the counterpart to the Ford Mach-E. It's an SUV version, and that drives really nice. They've done a very nice job on the inside. The way that the panels and stuff look, technology works really well. It's a very nice looking vehicle, but it's not the same as a Mach-E. It carries its own weight, right? It's kind of like a family vehicle, and it's different. It doesn't carry the battery underneath. The battery's in the front. So the Fords carry a frunk, and the battery goes underneath. The battery's in the front, and they give you a full-size trunk. So it's interesting, the design differences between the two manufacturers, but I do have to say that they're both really good products. So I'm proud to be part of that, and I'm proud that we offer good stuff to people. And Nissan is going to be coming up with some other products as well. They're looking at e-Power, which is similar to hybrid technology. They do have e-Power in Europe right now. They have almost like a I don't know what's the best. I don't know what name they call it, but I believe that they're using the X-Trail as the name in Europe, and it's like an e-powered Rogue, and so that's something that they have there. They were initially not going to bring it to the North American marketplace, but I think now they realize that there is a market for hybrid vehicles. I'm driving a hybrid right now, hybrid truck, and I switched to the electric next week. So it'll be interesting to see how that transition goes. But there's definitely a market for hybrid, because you can get the best of both worlds, right? You're not going to have the range anxiety. You get some electric range on the vehicle. So for argument's sake, I would do in my truck a full tank of gas would run me, if I'm between highway and the roads, I would get about 900 kilometers mix, and of that 320 of that was utilizing the electric power, right? Now, if I went on a full trip, like all on the highway and kept my cruise on and stuff like that, I can get about 12, 1,300 kilometers out of it, of which about 400 was electric assisted. It gives you all the stats in the car, right? So hybrid, there's still I like the hybrids. It's a good compromise for people who don't want to make that life adjustment to move to electric vehicles. But the electric vehicles are now starting to really have a cult following.
But most of the hybrids you do have to charge, right?
Nope,
Oh no, really?
nope, hybrid. So you have a plug-in hybrid,
Yep.
which you can charge,
Hmm.
and it gives you extended electric range. With the hybrid that has an engine, it has an electric engine, and it has the powered engine. You can regen as you brake. It basically has like an alternator that'll continue to push some power to keep the electric piece going. The nice thing about it is in the truck I have something called Pro Power Onboard, and it's an electric generator. So I don't know if you remember a couple of years back, they had all the ice storms in Texas, and people were using their electric vehicles, and they were plugging it into the generator or receptacles of their home and running their home to keep the heat going, right? So my hybrid truck has the same Pro Power Onboard function as the electric truck. So when I do get into the electric truck, it's going to have it as well. But I had to do some work a couple weeks back. I had no access to electricity, and I plugged in my extension into the back of it. And every once in a while, the truck would start up and regen. And I worked for like 6 hours using the power, and I barely burnt any gas.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was crazy. And it has like, it has a 220 plug in there. So if you're the type of person that needs to plug in your trailer, for example, there's a compatible plug for that if you want to run power off of it if you don't have a power plug in. Um, and there's another one, two, three, four receptacles that are 110 volt that you can plug in other items. So you can do like the greatest tailgating party, and you wouldn't have to worry about charcoal and stuff. Just bring your little electric grill and plug it in on the back there. As a contractor, that's phenomenal because you don't have to worry about using a customer's power if you're outside doing a deck or something. You back up your truck, you run your extension, you can run 4 extensions off of it. It's crazy the way the technology has gone over the years, and it became really useful. I literally needed power, and where I was had zero power, and I was like, what am I going to do? My used car manager at least said to me, hey, check and see if your car has Pro Power Onboard and plug it into the generator. I'm like, oh man, I didn't even think about that, right? So I went, I'm like, it has it. It was beautiful. It was a lifesaver for me.
You know what else is beautiful, George? With the Fast and Furious movie out,
Yep.
I had to ask you because I looked a little bit and I'm a little confused. Nissan GT-R,
Yep.
is it done or is it come back?
No, no. So they were talking about a Nismo edition, which if you look up online, there are a couple dealers that are GTR dealers, and they have one of them I know for a fact has a Nismo there. They're asking a lot of money for it because it's rare. You're getting one, and you're probably going to have a few dealers that will have it, but not the multitude of dealers having it. So my understanding is that the GTR is still going. Any sort of stuff that I have seen as communication from Nissan, the GTR is going to continue, but obviously it is a high demand with low availability, with low supply. It's going to be very low supply. So you're going to find, similar to a lot of the other products, that people are going to be paying over MSRP to get that coveted edition for that year because there are not a lot of them.
I feel you. And the Mustang, I'm going to ask you, you made a mention there. Is it a refresh or a new generation for
No,
2024?
it's new. It's a new redesign.
Well, it's a whole new generation.
Whole new
Wow.
redesign. Yeah. So look it up online. You'll see it. It has some cues of the old Mustang. A little bit of it looks like a little bit like a Camaro, the way that they flattened out the part of it. The visibility is still good. As you know, Camaro visibility is not the best because of the way the windshield comes down with the hard top, right? But they've maintained their visibility. The vehicle looks pretty sleek. They have a whole bunch of new features in there. I'm trying to think. One of the features, we were looking at it with our guys last week, and it was like a racing feature on there, and it came standard with it. I can't remember what it is right now, but it was kind of cool because back in the day you had line lock. The GTRs were known for things like launch control, right?
Right, right.
But if you had a GTR and you use your launch control, you void your warranty.
Oh,
right? It pushes the vehicle beyond its limits, but mostly guys who do it that were tracking it and stuff like that. So they have some nice racing features in the Mustang now that help you learn about tracking and stuff like that. They've really kept it as a performance vehicle, especially when you're getting into the Dark Horse edition. They have done a phenomenal job on the vehicle. I love the way it looks now. I got to see it live in Vegas. They brought it out on stage, and they had it on this rotisserie, let's call it, that was rolling around, so you could see all the changes, and you had somebody that pointed out all the changes. I mean, that was October last year, so I don't remember everything, but it was a nice redesign. It was a nice redesign.
I presume we're not going to get the square vanilla ice driving in my 5.0. That look probably not coming back, I assume.
I don't know. I mean, you never know. You never know. Like the Maverick and the F-150s are getting square. I used to like those old 5 liter Fox bodies. And there are a lot of people, like I was talking to you the other day about it. There are a lot of people that they have a cult following. You have Fox body groups and guys that show up at shows, and they have all the forums online, like Fox Body Mustangs. They're guys that go out and find them and restore these things. We had a customer here. His was a 1984, and he had this thing pristine. Right, he ended up selling it because he wanted to get a newer one. But I'll tell you, they still did a nice job on them, and for that car, it was light. So control issues. You got to be a really good driver. Rear wheel drive, like sometimes you pop it into third, you could spin the car out because there's so much torque going to the wheels. That's why they're so popular.
Listen, there's groups out there for Pontiac Fieros,
That's
and
true.
and those people became friends because they all spent time with the same mechanic, waiting for their cars to get fixed each and every time, and
Yeah,
that's how they bonded. That their car show was at the mechanic shop,
yeah, that's right.
and it's funny because as far as mid-engine goes and everything else, pretty revolutionary for its time, but
That's
very
true.
very poor execution.
Yeah,
Pontiac
yeah, yeah,
Solstice, another one I can think of.
yeah,
Really, really cute little convertible in its time, but if you actually look at it mechanically, not that stellar, and there's a
mhm,
reason why
mhm.
it didn't last.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
there's a reason why certain brands just went by the wayside. They may look good on an ad, but
yeah.
if they don't last test of time, they're not going to survive for very long.
Well,
As
look at the Plymouth Prowler, right?
uh,
Nice looking vehicle.
that buddy driving around the Mercury Marauder, if
Yeah.
find out for me if he's ever looking to move it. Maybe we can
Well, if I
talk.
see
Because
him, if I see him next time,
old man
remember what I
muscle
remember what I told you. You only have one behind.
Old man muscle car, you're talking about language. George, as we're summing up today's episode, now, we always do this, but we got to talk about now as we're in the summer of 2023, starting to think about the fall. For those car buyers out there, again, they hear things in the media, they get all alarmed, they don't know what's fact, what's fiction. Somebody coming now to you today saying, I'm looking to buy my first car, or I've owned my first car for a while, I want to trade it in, get my next car. What message could you have for me? What's going on in the car market today? What message could you leave for those buyers today?
So, I mean, you look at the car market where it's changed over the last few months. Um, there's still a perception out there that used car values at a record high. It's starting to come down. It has come down. Let's be honest. It's not to where it was previously, but people are not getting as much equity as they were before. So it's a little bit harder to flip into the vehicles because the new vehicles have gotten a little bit more expensive, right? But I'm a firm believer. I like leases. I've been in the business for a long time. I like leases because it gives you flexibility, right? So, you know, a retired person, a young person starting their career and stuff like that. For argument's sake, let's imagine, Jonathan, that you were 21 years old again. I mean, you look 21, but let's imagine that you were 21 again, right? And you get out of university, and you're not as wealthy as you are now, because I mean, you'd be an articling student then, and,
I'm
and
still
not a,
not.
not not a
So
partner, right? So then you'd be like, okay, well, I need a car because I need to get to work. I need to be able to make a living. Okay, so you forego the BMW M3 because it's not in the budget yet, right? And let's say, for argument's sake, you got into a Nissan Sentra. So you lease that vehicle, right? Nissan Sentra, a great car. I'm telling you, one of the most comfortable seats I've sat in a car. Nissan Sentra, zero gravity seats. Everybody look it up. Now, you're paying 350 plus tax, $400 for the top end model of a Sentra in a 3-year, 4-year lease, right? So you get into that. Okay, 3, 4, 5 years later, you get promoted, you find a nice lady, you're looking to get married, and then you have a kid, right? So let's say that happened in 3 years. Let's say like you like to accelerate your timelines, right? Let's say that happened in 3 years. So the average person finances a vehicle, they're going to finance it for 6 years, 7 years sometimes, because they want to keep that affordability factor there. I can afford this. The lease, because you're not paying on 100% of the vehicle and there's a residual, you can get into the nicer car for a similar payment of what it would put you in that extended finance period, number one. Number two, there are a couple benefits to it. So, that time comes around where you're getting married, you're having a kid, kid's on the way. The Sentra is not going to cut it for the baby seat because the twins coming. You need to upgrade to an Edge or an Escape or a Murano or a Rogue, right? So
or a plane ticket to Mexico.
True, but I mean, you don't run away from your responsibilities.
No, I bring her with me.
Right. Anyway, so yes, it's going to cost you more, but the fact is your lease could be coming to an end then, and you have the ability to move up the higher model to satisfy your life needs. Or you find somebody who's a young student who's now starting off and they need that low payment like you, and you have them take over your lease, absolves you of your responsibility so you can move on with life. If you're in financing a vehicle and you stretch it out too long, it's time to trade it in. There's going to be negative equity. You're going to have to carry that over to the next one. And this is how the cycle of sometimes car buying, when you buy it, it makes it very hard for you to see the end of the day if you keep flipping the cars on the finance, right? So I like leases. Always have liked leases. I'm in the business. My wife, we lease a car for her because it just makes sense for me financially, because she gets a nicer car, it costs me a little bit less. And it allows you to be flexible in the way that your life has moved. We moved from an Escape to an Explorer because we had another child, right? We had that extra room. Her parents don't drive as much, so having the Explorer upgrade, you need the 7 seats to carry them around. It allowed us to do that because I didn't have to worry about a balance on a finance. And you have the option to purchase on the lease and not the obligation. The other thing that people don't always know about leases, and both Nissan and Ford have them, is gap protection. So if anybody doesn't know what gap protection is, there's a lot of times that it's on your insurance policy. And what happens is that in the event that, God forbid, you get into an accident and there's a discrepancy between the payoff of your vehicle and the value of the vehicle as per the market and its condition, you have a variance. If you're on a finance deal and your car has a payout of $30,000 because you rolled another car in there, but the market dictates to you that that's $20,000, the insurance company will pay your $20,000 and you're on the hook for the 10. If you're in a lease from the manufacturer, be it Ford or Nissan, every lease carries gap protection. Okay. I had a customer, they own moving companies, very well-known moving company. I'm not going to say the name on here, but he had an issue. He got into an accident. His car was $6,000 difference because he put so many kilometers on it. And he had a buyback still at that point, because at that point, you need to look at the buyback plus your remaining payments of what the manufacturers own. And his gap insurance kicked in and paid that $6,000 difference. He had absolutely no responsibility for that.
Amazing.
So,
I did not even know that was an option. That's incredible to know.
So I like leasing. Listen, not everybody's very good at purchasing vehicles at a wholesale level and driving them for free for a few years, right? Like, there are people that do that, and that's another model. If you're a savvy enough buyer and you're able to say, great, I'm going to buy a used car that's been depreciated, but I get such a good deal on it. I could drive it around and the market dictates, a couple of years down the road, I can flip it out and keep my payment steady and keep my obligation steady. And I didn't lose anything for driving it for that 2 years. Great, that works too. But if you want to go with the rest of it, because everybody wants the next new shiny cell phone, a lease is your way to go. Now, I'm going to have a lot of people disagreeing with me because they're like, oh, you're renting the car, blah, 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 blah. You're not renting the car. Because let's face it, if you're financing the car, Jonathan, guess who owns it until you make that last payment?
The bank.
Correct. Same thing with your house. So that's the reality of it. You're basically renting it until you own it, and that payment's over. And a lot of times, if you're getting into a 7-year and an 8-year finance, trust me, most people want to switch out halfway through. Number two, you're not going to find yourself in an equity position until you hit that 6th or 7th year on those long terms. And realistically, your life might have changed so much that you're like, well, I'm going to have to take the $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 hit because I need it because I'm having twins, right? There are lots of benefits to leasing. If anybody has questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
George Hill of Erinwood Ford and Direct Nissan. Do you have time for one bonus round question?
Sure, let's go for it.
All right, bonus round. So I got a boy, right? My boy, take him to work one day. I'm a lawyer, real estate lawyer. He looks at this machine. He says to me, "What is this thing called, Daddy?" I said, "This is called a fax machine, son." He goes, "What does that do?" I said, "You put the paper, you enter the phone number, and through the phone line, it sends the paper. Somebody else has a machine. It brings through the paper, and that's how you can send." It was a really great technology, so you didn't have to mail, courier things, and you can have it almost instant. Have you heard of something called emails? Why do you bother having this?
True.
Well, you had a point, right?
Yep.
He had the same question for me the other day. We're driving around and he sees this something called a minivan on the road, right? He says, "Dad, what's that?" I go, that's a minivan. He goes, "What's the purpose of that?" "Oh, it's a really big thing back in its day where, you were talking about having kids, you got promoted, now you're having twins. It was the kind of thing you broke out of your sedan, you got this thing called a minivan. It was easy to bring your family, carry people around." "Dad, have you heard of something called an SUV? Why did they bother?" So I got to ask you, George Hill, even back in the day when minivans were big, and back in the 80s, 90s, whatever, early 2000s, they still had things called SUVs. What happened to the minivan, and will we ever see them come back?
That's a good question. So minivans and their popularity, I don't think will ever be back. When Ford made the decision to stop making minivans, and Nissan did the same thing years later because they had the Quest, and Ford had the Freestar and the Windstar, right? Like the Freestar was a replacement for the Windstar, and they made the decision back in 2008, 2009 to stop making the minivan. And part of the reason why they did it is they said the segment was 14% of the purchases, and they felt that over the years it was going to decline. Now, maybe it has to do something with affordability because let's face it, the Canada Value Package on the Dodge Caravan was an affordable option for many, many people, and that's the reason why they bought it, because they needed to carry more people. It was the cheapest thing available. Where you're stepping up to an SUV, it was a lot more expensive. It was because, let's face it, it was not the same. It was not the same transmission or drivetrain. It was not the same ride and comfort. It was a budget brand, and that's part of the reason why the minivans have kind of gone down. However, Toyota Sienna, Honda, even the Quest and the Freestar, they actually had some higher models of them that were quite nice, but the stigma that was attached to it just made it die that natural death, right? An SUV, you look nice in it. It's stylish, right? It's no longer, hippies driving around in VW vans, right? This is a different world. People are more sophisticated. And that's why I don't think that a minivan will ever come back to the level that it was before, because they're building the SUVs to be the people runners, to do all the family vacations, to making it comfortable, to have all the luxury in it, heated and cooled seats and massage this and massage that. And they still have screens in there to keep the kids occupied. And you can run your Wi-Fi through it. It's changed because people don't want to have that while we're driving in this cheap vehicle, and it's really hot because the Canada Value Package didn't have full air conditioning or something along those lines, but it was affordable for us. So we could drive with the windows down, those little windows at the back that you pushed out. It just won't come back. People are spoiled these days.
Do you remember what the minivan replaced? The station wagon.
Yeah, that's true. Although they ran them at the same time.
It's the guy who's driving that Mercury Marauder. Ask him if he's got a Dodge Magnum or a Buick Roadmaster around.
He might. Listen, when I was a kid and I grew up in Barbados, we had a yellow Renault station wagon. It was the ugliest thing ever, but it was so fun to drive in because you just as a kid, seat belts, please. You just sit in the back and roll around the back of the trunk.
You remember they had the trunk, but they had seats in the trunk facing the other way, like on a subway.
Yeah.
So you get to face the people behind you.
That was fun.
In a wood paneled station wagon, like
wood panel,
like Russ Grinwald in the National Lampoon's Vacation.
That's right. So yes, it did replace that, but they did run them concurrently for some time. And funny enough, when I went to Europe 10 years ago, because it's coming up on our 10-year anniversary, my wife and myself tomorrow. Um, there were station wagons. There were station wagons still in Italy, Ford Focus station wagons, right? And they look nice. So they still do have some vehicles that are offering it. Volvo still makes a station wagon. Mercedes in Germany still had station wagons up to a couple of years back. I don't know if they still manufacture them or not. So there's still a market, but definitely not North America.
In Japan, they had Toyota Prius 7-seaters.
Yeah.
And in Europe, they had Chevy Cruze station wagons.
Yeah. And they renamed them like through the Opel. They were Opels, right? Yeah. Yeah.
You got
so
it.
It's a different world. Like when we went years back and we went to all the various countries on the cruise, I took pictures. And if you were to go back on Erinwood's Facebook page 10 years back, you'll see all the pictures of the various Ford cars from Europe, different things in Turkey and Italy. So I took pictures and I documented the whole thing. Well, look at this Ford. And shortly after that, I went back home on a trip and there was Ford Festivas and there were Ford Escorts, the old kind of wide body ones that guys used to rally with. And I took pictures of all those and we threw it on Facebook too to say, hey, look at this, look at this, look at this, right? And I was like so excited, like seeing all these different iterations of it, because like, man, you don't get to see these at home, and it was a little bit nostalgic, right?
Folks, get on the Erinwood Instagram page and check it out. George Hill, thank you for staying overtime today.
Thank you, buddy.
We had to get to that bonus round. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. To reach George Hill, you'll have the contact information over at Direct Nissan, Erinwood Ford. Thank you for sharing your car wisdom, life wisdom, and we look forward to having you back real soon on The Chosen Life.
Cool. Thank you very much.
And please leave your comments for George Hill. And if you have any questions about cars in general, George is happy to answer. And we'll see you all real back soon on The Chosen Life.